I was fortunate to work on this site. It's not my current site, but I'll get into that. Did I do something? Ah, okay. Um, can I miss a slide? Okay. There were 5 different smelters located in the Midvale site between 1871 and 1958. One mill continued to operate until 1971. I mean, yeah, 1971. The smelters treated, of course, ores from the Bingham Canyon and other mines. Investigations at the site found groundwater and soils to be contaminated with heavy metals. Lead and arsenic are the primary waste products associated with the ore processing, but we also had, as you figure, copper, arsenic, gold, and silver. The Midvale slag was posted on the National Priorities List on February 11th, 1991. So, what does, here's a question, get a prize. What does NPL, what does it kick off for Mark Spector? What's for Superfund sites? Thank you, Mark. Um, oh, I'm not doing very good here. The site was remediated between 2005 and 2007, and the cleanup was off-site disposal of the highest contaminated or the Category 1 materials, and then on-site storage of the slag materials, placing over a vegetated cap. That was before my time. I'm about the third project manager on the site, and the bulk of the talk is, because it's the Jordan River, is going to be on the riparian work, which was the part that I worked on. Narrow framing is something that makes you miss options. And in this case, this is supposed to be a joke, but basically this would be like EPA at the table saying, you know, we're going to do another remedy like what is typically for Superfund sites at that time. This is about, over 10 years ago, which was basically a capping of the entire site. And in this case, instead of a man there, it'd be like Mayor Sagini in the city of Midvale. And she in the city of Midvale said, no, we don't want another Sharon Steel. So it's kind of a joke, but this was what happened in Utah was a little bit ahead of the curve and drove some of the changes that happened in Superfund. There's an old saying, necessity is the mother of invention. And until we're forced to dig up new options, we're likely to stay focused on the ones we already have. And where this comes from is a book called Decisive, How to Make Better Choices by Chip and Dan Heath. And I just felt like I read this book recently, and it was very nice to reflect on some of the things that happened at this site. And I appreciate being here, and it's kind of like, after time you can do a little bit better of lessons learned. But going back to, since we're in a technical meeting, I'm going to talk about what, did I miss a slide? Oh well, okay. Here was our cleanup objectives. It gives you what some of the levels of arsenic and cadmium that we had out there. And as mentioned before in other talks, we have site-specific data to decide what our goals are and what the use of the land is going to be. In this case, because the city wanted it to be developed, and we had to put in a restriction that the groundwater was not going to be used as a drinking water source. And so this was another new thing that happened with this site that was new to EPA. It's very much more common today, but it was alternative concentration limits, or ACLs. In other words, we didn't have a goal of cleaning it up to MCLs. We came up with a more realistic number. And what the remedy required is the state of Utah as a partner on this. In fact, they're the main lead on this site now for monitoring the groundwater at the site and some surface water. And you can't change this to go back to what it was without all these years of smelter operations. So this is a reasonable goal to achieve for this site. The state of Utah, as I said, is responsible for the groundwater and the surface water monitoring. And the city of Midvale has institutional controls to monitor the redevelopment of this property. And they're posted on the Midvale City's webpage, and they're listed under the planning department for the Bingham Junction zone. So after the cleanup was occurred, which was, that's not the focus of my talk today, and institutional controls were established, then you have to get what they consider ready for reuse of the property. And that was issued in September 29th, 2011. It was actually after I started working on the site, and redevelopment continues. And anybody that's been down to Midvale, you wouldn't even know it was a former Superfund site today. But part of that, we also had a chunk of money that was for riparian restoration, in large part because of we were concerned about cap erosion. In other words, we left, as I said at the beginning, there's a lot of mine smelter waste that remains on the site, and we had to protect it so that the river would not erode what part of the cap was and release that to the Jordan River. And establishing, as I said earlier, the groundwater monitoring and the surface water monitoring. Another question, does anybody know, and not you, Mark, brownfields. Does anybody understand what the term brownfields is? Somebody? Marion back there. So please tell us what brownfields are. Right. That's it in part. But the reason why we call it brownfields is because it was contaminated, and versus greenfields. Greenfields are something like going out and development of something that would be more pristine. So we've encouraged trying to use already damaged and environmentally impacted properties. For this site, the part that I worked on primarily was the phased restoration of the Jordan River riparian area. And as I said earlier, the reason why this funding was here was to block cap erosion. And there was a failing sheet pile dam. And my friend was saying, what's a sheet pile dam? It's basically a steel sheet pile like you see in construction. That's what was running across the river. And it was basically like a dam to back up part of the river for probably in the smelting period of time. And it had been damaged. And if you had been through that part of the river during that time, you'd be like, oh my gosh, this is like very dangerous looking. And it's just a remnant, but you can't just pull that out because you have all the other bridges and properties along the river. So if you pull that out, the river is going to move and change. And as the whole meeting is discussing, the Jordan River is a managed river. It's not a natural river. And for my part, I like to use money wisely. I appreciated, the economist is in the back. She gave a talk earlier about the economy, what the value you're getting for what you're spending. And we had a little limited budget for this project. And I knew we'd never get any more because EPA's budget is based on risk. And by the time I got it, all the risk was mostly gone. So there would be no more money coming back. Also, EPA you can't use money to improve property. And the main thing I wanted to avoid was further damage that could happen if we change the river dynamics. Along with this, always is part of the important to anything that you do is the stakeholders and the community. And you have to figure out what they need to know and what they care about. And part of that is how are you going to relay information? And Miriam, who raised her hand back there, was one of the people working with Salt Lake County that helped us relay some of that information. And you have to figure out, are our goals in alignment? And that's part of what the talk is about. So one of the decisions that I made early on is to phase the work instead of eating the whole cake at once. So we had about $3 million. And so you don't want to take that chunk of money and only have one phase. However, the contractors that were working on the site, when I started this site, I inherited from somebody else. They had a different vision than that. But when you phase the work, you have boundaries. And this is in that book, Decision Making. Boundaries are necessary because people have a tendency to escalate their commitment to the choices. So by chopping it up into phases with less money, it gave a boundary by the financial. And a tripwire means, a tripwire in this case is meaning, okay, we're going to do something on the river. We're going to modify maybe a little bit, and we'll see what happens and what we need to do next. So you don't have everything going for one part. And you have to cap your risk. In this case, the risk is we did not want to damage downstream structures or cause problems that we didn't know about. This was out of my field. I was going to start out saying my background, I actually am not a geohydrologist. I'm not a biologist. I'm not a watershed person. So I was learning along the way, even though I'm a scientist and an engineer. It's a learning process. Again, going back into this river system, it was a challenging, even for a knowledgeable person in this field, this is a very challenging river. And that's one of the wonderful things about this symposium is it's a meeting, and it's moving us beyond where we normally think. But this is the same photo in January of 2009 at 30 CFS. And then May of that year at 1,080 CFS. And it's a very difficult river to work with because it's such a highly managed river. So as I said, the current contractor, when I inherited the site, were big, what I call big guns. And this would have been probably what their engineering design was. I mean, I heard some comment talking about how engineers like to do things. And one of the main things that made me like, wait a minute, I'm not going there, is they wanted to relocate the river to change the sheet pile dam. Well, that would have been that whole pie, that whole cake. That's where all of our money would have gone. And then myself, I lived in Utah for a few years. I tend to really care about the natural beauty. I was just shocked at, and you can see, go down to Sandy, you see that horrible invasive plant problem in Utah. And it's been growing every year I've come to visit. So I was thinking, let's put a war on these invasive plants. But that would have taken a lot of money as well. And, you know, if we would have taken out all the invasives hold the bank together. So that wouldn't have worked either. So this is me with a couple of pieces of the puzzle, trying to find what the unknowns are and develop some viable solution. Well, I had used the USGS on other Superfund sites for consulting, not as a contractor, not for a report, not for a big study, but just to tap their brain. In this case, I asked him, I said, well, can I hire you to go out there and do some boreholes along the riverbank to see how much cap is there so that I know, you know, how much armoring we might need to do in certain areas to protect the cap. Because, as I said, I wasn't there during the reclamation work. I inherited it towards the end. So we did some boreholes along the bank, not like a big study, just to find out, okay, is there 2 feet of cover? Is there 5 feet of cover? That type of thing. Also we did, which is what all of us should do, is the visual. Walk along the river, check out the channel. Where does it change? How does it change? Where is it eroding? Where is it dumping? What's going on here? What does this sheet pile play? In the meantime, one of the things that we did is worked with the existing, oh my gosh, I'm almost out. Anyway, city and county to try to see if they would be partners. The next one's more for the economists. This is a quote from the book. Dwight Eisenhower in 1953 said, the cost of one heavy bomber is this: a modern brick school for more than 30 cities. It's 2 electric power plants serving towns of 60,000 people. It's 2 fully equipped hospitals, 50 miles of concrete highway. Those are opportunity costs. So what are we giving up by making this decision? I'm going to have to really go find it. So you attain distance before you move forward. In this case, we hired the USGS. They did a 2-dimensional study, both on the sediment load and the water volume through the Jordan River. Based on that, we we did, we replaced the sheet pile dam with another sheet pile dam, although it doesn't look like it because it's covered with concrete and rocks and boulders. So if you go there today, it doesn't look like the old sheet pile dam. It looks like this. Along that, one of the things that's important is having devil's advocates, people that don't actually think the way you do, and you need to be able to be open to that criticism. In this case, the devil's advocate was Steve Jensen, who worked with the city and county of Salt Lake County, and part of that was huge because you got to have somebody notice your blind spots. We followed what the city and what Steve Jensen was using successfully along the Jordan River, which is the emergent bench, which slows down the river. I mean, allows for widening of the river. It changes the erodibility of it, besides doing the replacement dam, and it stabilizes the river. I'm going to just fly through these. I'm out of time. We still had problems with some of the things that we did. Some of the beaver fencing didn't work. We had beavers chop off all of our fencing. We didn't do everything. We did pockets along the river. Sorry to go through here. But I wanted to get into some of the partners. We did a lot of show and tell. I had people like the woman from Coca-Cola. We go out to the site, walk through the site, see what is going on, talk about it. And we tried to involve a wider spread. We used on this site, instead of the main big contractors, we used veteran-owned business, small minority-owned business. We used Utah Conservation Corp. We used a wide variety. Salt Lake County was given a grant. So we didn't go through the normal contracting. And I'll just get into the end here. We have did 4 phases, and this shows what the what has taken place. Not all of it is successful, but it was pretty successful overall, and it worked well to do it in phases. And that's about it. Any questions? Sorry to rush through all that.
About 5 minutes left for questions. I'm going to bring the mic back so that we can get this on
camera. The wetland restoration area south of the bank treatment area.
Right.
I've walked that many times. I consider it a total failure. Could you address what can be done in terms of removing or controlling exotics? I understand it's private property now.
Yes, the developer was supposed to take over. The developers that develop part of that property were supposed to take over management of it. And as I said at the beginning, this was the tail end of EPA's work. We don't have, so I would encourage you to put pressure on the city of Midvale and encourage them to get their developer to follow
I've
through.
tried. They're hopeless.
I'm sorry. I will let that know, because I meant to tell you, I'm no longer on this site.
This is a poor legacy for EPA for that particular site.
Okay.
That could have been very successful if there had been monitoring and follow through on exotic control.
Yeah. Oh, Salt Lake County has gone in and done what they can do in some areas, but not all of it. It's a huge project. It's the invasive problems. But I take your criticism, and I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Carrie Fiedler is the new project manager on this site.
Thank you. I'm just curious if you could characterize before and after the remediation took place, what the relative contribution to heavy metals loading in the river was from this site as compared to inputs from tributaries.
Oh, the percentage? Well, I don't know that answer. I can give you the numbers that we have, but that's why we had to go through the ACLs instead of the MCLs. But it's not just the site at Murray City. There's several sites, but what we have is dilution is the solution. We don't see a surface water impact that is as great as you would suspect. Now, if the water levels are as low as that continual, but in part because we have a cap now on the site, and so we don't have as much infiltration through the same thing with Murray. You don't get the infiltration through the residual heavy metal material, so it's pretty limited, but still higher than what you'd like to see. So those are general terms.
So you mentioned that some aspects you consider successful and some less successful of the project. I wonder if those uh, parts that were less successful have been documented somewhere so we can learn from that information and make better decisions in the future, and or maybe why some things were not successful.
Some of it was, like I said, there's the USGS, their study of the Jordan River was a published report, and it talks about the managed river and what worked well with their modeling. Of course, with the modeling, it doesn't always reflect exactly what the energy of the river was, but that was a very helpful report, can be applied to other things. Some of the things that I've said, and like the gentleman's comment about the riparian area, we did do, I left this out, but we had two graduate students. We had a student that did a invasive plant study for her PhD. She was hired for the summer. And then we also had a student that was through, I think, Utah State on the soils in the area that we hired for the summer. And they did PhD, part of their PhD reports on that, their published reports. The weed or the invasive plant mitigation is basically tracking what you have and continuing to go after what you can. It's the same type stuff. Every year we have paid for Job Corps to do some basically physical removal of especially these Russian olive and Phragmites. We also do some pre-emergent spraying and that type of thing. It's but it's a constant battle. But I think it's knowing and having markers to say, okay, this area, like the man said, this is a failure, and I can tell you it's a failure because these reasons, taking pictures and documenting that. And so I hope that things like this symposium and people being aware is a way for people to say, okay, this has been done and it's proved useful. Like EPA doesn't usually go out and say, okay, we're going to pay for pre-emergent mitigation measures. But in this case, you can't just always go out there and pull everything. I mean, it's just impossible. And working with Steve Jensen, it was nice because he'd been around for, I don't know, 25 years with Salt Lake County. And so I walked, he told me, he says, go over here and see this and see this. You find out what is successful, which is in their Watershed Watch newspaper, and you go and see what's successful and see what isn't. And some of the native types of plants that they had to work so hard because of the water requirements are not as successful as some of the more hardy types of plants. We did a lot of willows and willow placement, and there's actually quite a bit of rock armoring along the work that we did instead of planting because the willows are easier to take root and they really hold the bank. They're more successful. Thank you.